The emergency session had been running for 3 hours, and Commander Velkix's scales were flashing distress patterns nobody had seen in decades. "The Cubs have barricaded themselves in Junction 19, the security chief's voice cracked through the council chamber. "They're calling it a defensive position against—" He paused, mandibles clicking in confusion. "Shadow infiltrators." Ambassador Julix, whose species had brokered peace across 15 star systems, stood with all 4 arms trembling. "My offspring are convinced an invasion force has breached the station. They've identified multiple hostiles and are mounting coordinated strikes." "We've scanned everything," a Nexian analyst interjected, her tentacles writhing anxiously. "No unknown biosignatures, no dimensional breaches, no cloaked vessels, nothing that matches their threat descriptions." "Then what are they fighting?" The council chair's voice boomed across the chamber. "We don't know." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Station security couldn't identify a threat that had 2 of the galaxy's most dangerous predator species cubs, Zulix's offspring, in full combat mode. The cubs were young, barely past their naming cycles, but their species didn't produce offspring lightly. Each cub represented decades of genetic selection, and their threat assessment instincts were supposedly infallible. "They've been displaying tactical formations for the past 6 hours, Velki continued, pulling up holographic displays. "Watch this." The projection showed 2 small forms moving in perfect synchronization, stalking something along the corridor walls. They'd crouch, pounce, retreat, regroup. Their movements were textbook predator behavior, hunting patterns that had evolved over millions of years. "What are they tracking?" someone asked. "According to them, hostiles that appear and disappear. Entities that move when they move, stop when they stop. They claim the enemy is mirroring their every action, some kind of advanced psychological warfare technique." Dr. Nick Sura, the station's lead xenopsychologist, stepped forward. Her species had studied predator development for thousands of years. "I've attempted communication. They're completely rational in their assessment. They've identified threats, categorized attack patterns, and established defensive protocols. By every measure of their cognitive development, they're responding appropriately to a genuine danger." "But there's nothing there," the Nexian analyst insisted. "That's what terrifies me," Nick Zura replied. "Either they're perceiving something our instruments can't detect, or something has compromised their threat assessment capabilities. Both options are catastrophic." Ambassador Julix's primary arms clenched. "If my offspring's instincts have been corrupted, it means someone has developed a weapon that can break predator species psychology. If they're detecting something we can't, it means we're blind too. An invasion already in progress." The implications rippled through the council. Predator species formed the backbone of galactic defense. Their threat assessment instincts had prevented countless conflicts simply by identifying dangers before they materialized. If something could fool those instincts, or worse, weaponize them, the entire security structure of known space was vulnerable. "We've evacuated surrounding sections," Velkix reported. "The Cubs won't leave their position. They insist retreat would allow the enemy to advance deeper into the station." "What do they want?" "Military support. They're requesting tactical teams to help them eliminate the infiltrators." The council chair's carapace darkened. "We're debating whether to deploy military forces against a threat we cannot see, cannot detect, and cannot verify, based entirely on the word of 2 cubs who haven't yet reached their maturity cycles." "My offspring do not lie about threats," Julix growled, all 4 arms spreading in challenge. "Their species has never produced a false alarm in recorded history." "Then where is this enemy?" Before anyone could respond, the chamber doors opened. Ginny walked in, pulling her cleaning cart, earbuds dangling around her neck. She surveyed the packed emergency session, the holographic displays of combat formations, the 36 species representatives in crisis mode. "Ah," she said. "Is this a bad time? I'm supposed to clean the council chamber at 1900. The entire room turned to stare at the human. Velkix's translator struggled with the informal phrasing. There is a critical security situation involving— Yeah, I saw the alerts on my datapad, Ginny interrupted, checking her schedule. Says something about cubs and an invasion. Do I need to come back later, or— Ambassador Zulix's scales shifted to a pattern the human couldn't interpret. The station is under potential attack. My offspring have identified hostile entities. We are attempting to understand the nature of the threat before— Wait! Ginny held up a hand. The cubs are fighting something? Declaring war, technically, Nixura corrected. They've been engaged in combat operations for over 6 hours. Combat operations? Ginny blinked. The little ones, the cubs, those cubs. They are highly trained in threat assessment and— Where are they fighting this thing? Velkix pulled up the Junction 19 feed. The cubs were currently pressed against opposite walls, eyes locked on something between them, bodies coiled to strike. Ginny leaned closer to the display, squinting. She watched for maybe 30 seconds while the most powerful beings in the sector held their breath. Then she started laughing. "Oh my God!" she gasped between chuckles. "Oh my God, are you serious right now?" The council chamber fell into shocked silence. Ambassador Zulix's voice dropped to a dangerous register. "You find my offspring's crisis amusing." Ginny wiped her eyes, still grinning. I'm sorry, it's just—" She gestured at the display. "Nobody's explained to them what shadows are." The temperature in the council chamber dropped noticeably. Shadows. Ambassador Zulix's forearms moved into what translators identified as a threat display. "You believe my offspring are responding to shadows?" "I mean, yeah?" Ginny gestured at the display where the cubs were stalking along the walls. "Look at them. They're following the dark spots on the floor. That's literally their own shadows." Dr. Nixura's facial tendrils stiffened. "Human Ginny, I must inform you that we've already considered and eliminated environmental factors. These cubs are experiencing genuine threat responses to entities that move when they move and stop when they stop," Ginny interrupted. "Yeah, that's how shadows work." Velkix pulled up additional footage. "Observe. The cubs have identified multiple hostiles. They've documented attack patterns, coordinated defensive maneuvers, and established threat hierarchies. This is sophisticated tactical analysis." The display showed Billin crouching low, eyes fixed on the dark shape stretching across the floor beneath the corridor lighting. When the cub moved left, the shape moved left. When Billin froze, it froze. "The entity mirrors all movement," Velke continued. "It demonstrates intelligence and coordination." Ginny stared at him. "It's a shadow." "We've analyzed the phenomenon extensively." A Nexian xenobiologist chimed in, their translation device crackling with urgency. "The cubs perceive these entities as hostile forces employing advanced mimicry tactics. Their predator instincts are calibrated to detect exactly this type of threat, something that matches their movements, studies their patterns, prepares to strike." "Because it's attached to them," Ginny said slowly, like she was explaining something to a particularly dense child. Light source above, solid object below, shadow forms between them. Basic physics. "The cubs don't assess shadows as threats," Zulix insisted. "Their species has evolved past such primitive responses. They're identifying actual hostile entities that happen to manifest in similar visual patterns." "Let me get this straight." Ginny set down her cleaning supplies. "You've got an entire emergency council session, pulled in specialists from across the station, and activated crisis protocols because 2 kids are fighting their own shadows. They are not children." Zulix's voice could have cut steel. "They are junior members of a predator species with threat assessment capabilities that exceed most military installations. When they identify danger, it exists." "Uh-huh." Ginny pulled up her datapad, scrolling through the incident reports. "And you've tried what, exactly?" Dr. Nixura gestured at a list that filled half the holographic display. "Psychological intervention protocols, threat reassessment therapy, sensory recalibration, treatments, cognitive behavioral modification, environmental manipulation, chemical calming agents." Did you try telling them shadows aren't real enemies? 17 times, Nixura confirmed. They interpreted our denial as evidence that the threat has compromised adult perception. They believe we've been mentally compromised and can no longer identify the danger. What about turning off the lights? Velkix's scales flashed irritation. We attempted environmental control. They interpreted darkness as the enemy achieving tactical advantage. Their panic responses intensified. Ginny watched the display where Dixel was now performing what the tactical overlay identified as a flanking maneuver against a shadow on the wall. The Cub's movements were genuinely impressive. Fluid, coordinated, tactically sound, just completely pointless. "Okay," she said. "I'm gonna go talk to them." The council chamber erupted. "Absolutely not." Zulik stepped forward, all forearms spread in barrier position. "My offspring are in combat mode. They will perceive approach as enemy reinforcement." "Human Ginny," Dr. Nixura added, her tone urgent. "These are predator species cubs in threat response. Their defensive instincts are extreme. They've already injured 2 security personnel who attempted intervention." "They're babies having a freak-out about shadows," Ginny countered. "I've dealt with worse at my sister's daycare." "This is not comparable to human child development," a xenobiologist interjected. "These cubs possess retractable claws, reinforced jaw structures, and hunting instincts calibrated across millions of years of evolution. In their current state, they're genuinely dangerous." "So you're just gonna leave them there?" "We're formulating a comprehensive intervention strategy," Velkix explained. "We've contacted the Nexian Institute of Predator Psychology, the Valdorian Combat Trauma Center, and the—" Ginny was already heading for the door. "Human, stop!" Zulix's command voice could have halted charging battle formations. Ginny paused, looked back. "You guys have been at this for 3 hours. I've got a station to clean. I'll have this sorted in 5 minutes." "You don't understand," Dr. Nixura pleaded. "Every species-approved intervention has failed. The Cubs are becoming more entrenched in their threat assessment with each attempt. We're approaching critical psychological damage thresholds. Yeah, because you're all treating it like an actual invasion instead of kids being confused." Ginny pulled open the door. "Where's Junction 19? "Human!" Velkix moved to block her path. "I cannot allow you to approach a hostile situation without—" "Without what? A tactical team? Psychological backup. They're Cubs fighting shadows. Literally." She ducked around him. "Someone point me the right direction before they hurt themselves pouncing at walls." Ambassador Zulix's scales shifted through patterns that suggested internal conflict between diplomatic protocol and parental instinct. "If you harm my offspring—" "If I harm them," Ginny laughed. "Dude, I'm not the one planning to shoot them with calming agents or whatever. I'm just gonna explain how light works." She was already down the corridor, following the directional signs, while the entire council scrambled to activate observation protocols and deploy emergency medical teams. Dr. Nixura pulled up every monitor in the sector, her voice tight with concern. "This is unprecedented. No approved intervention strategy involves direct confrontation by an unqualified—" "Shh," someone hissed. "She's almost there." Every screen in the council chamber shifted to show Ginny approaching Junction 19. Where 2 small predators were locked in mortal combat with the dark shapes on the walls. Ginny rounded the corner into Junction 19 and found herself facing 2 of the most adorable killing machines she'd ever seen. The Cubs were maybe 3 feet tall, covered in iridescent scales that shifted between deep blue and silver. Billion was pressed against the left wall, eyes locked on the shadow stretching beneath the overhead lights. Dixel held position on the right, tracking a different dark shape with the intensity of a seasoned hunter. "Hey there," Ginny said, keeping her voice light. Both Cubs whipped around, dropping into defensive crouches. Their scales flared into warning patterns. And, yeah, okay. Those were some serious claws extending from their small hands. "Stay back unidentified." Billin's voice was surprisingly deep for something so small. "The infiltrators have you surrounded." "The shadow things?" Ginny crouched down to their eye level, completely ignoring the 17 medical teams and tactical units watching through monitors. Yeah, I saw those. Pretty sneaky, huh? Dixel's head tilted, confusion breaking through combat focus. You can perceive the hostiles? The adults claim they see nothing. Oh, I see them. Ginny pulled out her datapad, switched on its flashlight function. Watch this. She held her hand between the light and the wall. A shadow hand appeared, fingers spread wide. Both cubs jumped, scales flashing alarm patterns. There's one right there. Billin pointed at the wall shadow. Yup, Ginny agreed. She wiggled her fingers. The shadow fingers wiggled back. In the council chamber, Dr. Nixura leaned forward. What is she doing? I don't know, Velkix admitted, his scales rippling with confusion. But they're responding to her. Ginny made her shadow hand into a bird shape, thumb and fingers moving like a beak. See? When I move, it moves. When I stop, she froze. It stops. Dixel crept closer, fascinated despite himself. The hostile obeys your commands? Not exactly. Ginny shifted positions, showing how the shadow moved with her. It's not a hostile. It's just what happens when something blocks light. Your bodies block the light from those panels up there, so you get a dark spot on the floor. That's your shadow. Our shadow. Billin tested the word carefully. Everyone has one. Watch. Ginny stood up, jumped once. Her shadow jumped with her. See? It copies everything I do because it's created by me. It's just physics. The cubs exchanged glances. Some kind of silent communication happening. But the war protocols, Dixel said slowly. The threat patterns. The coordination between multiple hostiles. Yeah, because there are two of you, Ginny interrupted gently. You each have your own shadow. When you move together, they move together. Not because they're coordinating an attack, but because you're both blocking light. She held up her datapad again, creating shadow shapes on the wall. Want to see something fun? Both cubs nodded, completely forgetting their defensive positions. Ginny made a shadow dog, then a shadow bird, then something that might have been a rabbit. You can make your shadows do stuff. Look. She made the shadow bird eat the shadow rabbit. Dixel made a sound that the translators identified as delighted surprise. Now you try. Ginny gestured to the cubs. Stand over here. Use that light panel. In the council chamber, absolute chaos reigned. She's playing with them, someone whispered, like witnessing a fundamental law of physics being violated. Impossible, Dr. Nixura breathed. They were in full threat assessment mode. No intervention protocol suggests playful engagement during active predator response. It should trigger increased aggression. Ambassador Julix was already sprinting toward Junction 19, expecting to find, what? Combat? Casualties. Instead, the ambassador skidded to a halt at the entrance, all forearms frozen mid-gesture. The cubs were taking turns making shadow shapes on the wall. Billin had figured out how to make something with flapping wings. Dixel was trying to create a shadow version of their own species, concentrating intensely on getting the arm positions right. Ginny sat cross-legged on the floor, applauding their efforts. Nice! Now make them fight each other. Shadow battle, no actual war required. The cubs grinned, an expression that looked genuinely unnerving with all those teeth, and started an elaborate shadow puppet combat sequence. What, Julix managed, is happening? Oh, hey, Ginny looked up. You must be the parent. Yeah, they're fine. Just needed someone to explain that shadows aren't actually attacking them. Parental unit. Billeen bounced over, scales shifting to excited patterns. The human taught us shadow manipulation. It's not warfare, it's physics. And we can make them do anything. Dixel demonstrated by creating an increasingly elaborate shadow creature. Julix stared at the offspring, then at Ginny, then back at the offspring who were now peacefully playing instead of preparing for mortal combat. Dr. Nixura's voice crackled through the ambassador's communicator. What's their status? Do we need psychological intervention teams? They're... Julix struggled for words. Making shadow pictures. They appear to be enjoying themselves. Silence on the other end. The human taught them it's a game, Julix continued, watching Ginny show the cubs how to make a shadow dragon. They're treating their shadows as entertainment rather than threats. That's not possible, Nexura insisted. We attempted play therapy integration. It failed spectacularly. The cubs interpreted all playful approaches as attempts to distract them from genuine danger. Well, Julix said quietly, it's working now. Ginny stood up, brushing off her uniform. Okay, so we good here? Because I really do need to clean the council chamber before second shift. You just... Julix gestured helplessly at the cubs, who were now teaching each other increasingly complex shadow shapes. How did you... They're kids who got confused about something. I just explained it. Ginny shrugged. Is that ambassador language for thank you or... Every protocol, Julix said slowly. Every intervention strategy developed over thousands of years of predator psychology research. And you fixed it by showing them hand shadows. I mean, when you say it like that, it sounds weird. Ginny checked her datapad. But, yeah, basically, they just needed someone to treat them like cubs instead of tactical assets having a malfunction. The cubs were now collaborating on an elaborate shadow story involving what appeared to be a space battle. Look, Billin called out. Parental unit, watch our shadow fleet. Julix watched, all forearms hanging limply, as everything known about predator species child development collapsed into irrelevance. The council chamber monitors showed every angle of Junction 19, where two predator cubs were now arguing enthusiastically about whether shadow creatures could fly through space without ships. I don't understand, Velkix said for the 5th time. We deployed psychological specialists. We consulted threat assessment experts. We implemented every approved protocol for predator species crisis intervention. Yeah, but did you try just talking to them? Ginny's voice came through the comm system. Like, as kids? Dr. Nexura pulled up volumes of research data, her tendrils moving frantically across displays. Our approach was based on comprehensive studies of predator species development. When cubs enter threat assessment mode, playful interaction is contraindicated. It undermines their cognitive security frameworks. They're what now? When predator cubs identify danger, treating it as non-serious causes psychological damage, Nexura explained. It teaches them to dismiss genuine threats. Every study confirms this. Ginny appeared on screen, sitting with the cubs who were now making increasingly elaborate shadow performances. Okay, but they're not dismissing threats. They just learned that shadows specifically aren't threats. That's different. How? Julix asked, genuinely confused. Because... Ginny paused, watching Dixel create a shadow creature that Billin's shadow creature was battling. Look, human kids do this all the time. They see something they don't understand. Their imagination fills in the gaps, and suddenly they're convinced monsters live under the bed or whatever. You don't treat it like a real military situation. You explain what's actually happening and redirect their energy into something fun. Imagination. The word translated poorly into most languages present. The creation of false realities for entertainment purposes. Sure, if you want to make it sound weird. Ginny showed the cubs how to make their shadow creatures shake hands instead of fight. But it's how kids learn. They imagine scenarios, test ideas, figure out how the world works. Sometimes they imagine scary stuff because they're processing new experiences. A Nexian analyst pulled up comparative data. Human children regularly experience fear responses to non-existent threats. All the time, Ginny confirmed. Shadows, closets, weird noises. Their brains are developing, everything's new and potentially dangerous, so they get creative with explanations. And the appropriate response is play. Velkix sounded like she was learning an alien concept. Usually works better than deploying tactical teams, yeah. Dr. Nexura stared at her research, thousands of years of predator psychology suddenly looking incomplete. We don't have play. Not like this. Our species engage in practice behaviors, hunting simulations, combat training, strategic exercises, but creation of imaginary scenarios for enjoyment. You're saying Predator species don't have imagination? Ginny asked. We have cognitive flexibility and scenario planning, Julix corrected. But we don't. We don't create false realities and choose to exist within them temporarily for pleasure. That sounds incredibly boring. It's efficient, Julix countered. But watch the cubs with new uncertainty. Billin was laughing, actually laughing, as Dixel made a shadow creature dance instead of attack. When did they start doing that? The ambassador asked quietly. Doing what? Laughing, creating stories. They've always been serious, focused. I thought it was proper development. Ginny glanced at the cubs, then back at Julix. Maybe they were trying to be what you expected, serious, focused, always assessing threats correctly. But they're still little. Sometimes little kids see shadows and get scared. Sometimes they need to just be silly for a while. The council chamber fell silent as the implications settled in. Our entire approach, Nixura said slowly, was designed to reinforce their threat assessment capabilities, to validate their response, identify the danger, eliminate it through proper protocols. Right, Ginny nodded. Which told them their fear was justified and something serious was happening. Made it worse. But if we dismissed their concerns... I didn't dismiss them, Ginny interrupted. I took them seriously. I looked at what they were afraid of, explained what it actually was, and then showed them it could be fun instead of scary. That's not dismissing. That's teaching. Velkix pulled up the timeline of interventions. 18 specialists, 6 hours, escalating crisis protocols, and the solution was explaining physics and playing games. Sometimes the simple answer is the right one, Ginny said. You all got so caught up in treating this like a military situation that you forgot they're just cubs who saw something confusing. Ambassador Julix watched Billin create an elaborate shadow story about explorers discovering new worlds. The cub was narrating with enthusiasm, making different voices for different shadow characters. They've never done that before, Julix murmured. Creative storytelling. We don't. Our species doesn't. Maybe because nobody showed them they could, Ginny suggested gently. You've been training them to be perfect threat assessors, but they're kids. Sometimes kids need permission to just be kids. A junior analyst, barely more than a cub themselves, spoke up hesitantly. I used to imagine my shadow was a companion. I thought I was defective because I couldn't stop creating the false scenario. Dr. Nixura turned slowly. You experienced imaginative play responses? I thought it was malfunction. I never reported it. Several other beings shifted uncomfortably. Oh my God, Ginny breathed. You've all been suppressing imagination because you thought it was broken threat assessment? It seemed illogical, someone admitted quietly. Ginny looked at the cubs, now peacefully playing, then at the council full of species who'd apparently never learned that being scared of shadows was normal, that imagination wasn't a malfunction, that play wasn't just combat training. Well, she said finally, that's depressing. But hey, at least crisis solved, right? The cubs are fine, nobody's being invaded by shadow entities, and I can finally clean the council chamber. Human Ginny, Julix said formally. You've resolved in minutes what our best experts couldn't solve in hours. You've introduced concepts that may fundamentally alter how we understand predator species development. This is significant. I showed some kids how shadows work, Ginny corrected. You're all acting like I discovered faster-than-light travel. To us, Velkix said quietly. You might as well have. 3 days later, Ginny arrived for her shift to find a formal delegation waiting outside the janitorial supply closet. Human Ginny, Ambassador Julix began, flanked by council representatives and what appeared to be university officials. We've drafted a proposal for a new station position, Director of Juvenile Development and Imaginative Integration. Ginny blinked. That sounds made up. It's a newly created role. Anexian Administrator. Confirmed. Salary commensurate with senior medical staff, full benefits, housing upgrade, research budget. I clean floors, Ginny interrupted. I'm not qualified to direct anything. You resolved a crisis our best experts couldn't solve, Velkix pointed out. You fundamentally altered our understanding of predator species development. I explained shadows. Exactly, Jolix said, like that proved something profound. We need that perspective institutionalized. Hard pass. Ginny grabbed her cleaning cart. I've got 6 sections to mop before midnight. But the cubs! Jolix gestured down the corridor where Billin and Dixel were showing a group of young Nexians how to make shadow creatures on the walls. They're doing great, Ginny agreed. See? They're even teaching others. You don't need me managing that. Other species are requesting human consultation, a council member added desperately. We've received 43 formal inquiries about implementing play-based learning protocols. So hire someone who actually studied that stuff. Ginny started pushing her cart. I'm sure there are humans with actual credentials. The cubs specifically requested you, Jolix said quietly. Ginny paused, looked back at where Billin was patiently showing a tiny Nexian how to position their appendages for better shadow shapes. Dixel was narrating an elaborate story about shadow explorers. They can visit while I work, Ginny offered. I'm not stopping them from hanging around. And they did. Every shift, like clockwork. 2 predator cubs showed up to make shadow puppets while Ginny mopped. They'd created increasingly complex games, taught dozens of other young aliens, and apparently sparked what Dr. Nick Zura was calling a paradigm shift in developmental psychology. Ginny just called it common sense. The Galactic Council was currently rewriting xenopsychology textbooks. The Nexian Institute had launched an entire department studying human play therapy concepts. Ambassador Jolix's species had sent delegates to visit human daycare centers, all because nobody had explained how light worked. Human Ginny, Billin called out one evening. Can shadows exist in zero gravity? Probably, if there's a light source and something blocking it. But would they float? Dixel added. I mean, shadows don't really float or not float. They're just absence of light. The cubs discussed this seriously, then started designing experiments to test shadow behavior in various gravitational conditions. Behind them, 3 xenobiologists took frantic notes. Ginny mopped around them, occasionally offering suggestions like, maybe try the observation deck or ask maintenance about the gravity generators. By the time her shift ended, the cubs had recruited 5 other species' offspring into their shadow research project. Dr. Nick Zura had filled 2 data tablets with observations, and someone had started a formal proposal for a Center for Imaginative Development Studies. Ginny clocked out, waved goodbye to the cubs, and headed home. Just another night shift on the station where she'd accidentally revolutionized galactic psychology by explaining that shadows weren't scary. She really needed to finish that council chamber cleaning, though.